Friends. How nice to be able to be together like this and share these beautiful teachings. So, as a continuation of what we were talking about yesterday, today we're going to focus a little bit more on how we individually and personally can live according to the principles in the Autobiography of a Yogi, which is a great topic. It's so one thing that Yogananda said is that life is a school. Life is for our education and entertainment. Then he added, but how few are either educated or entertained. And so the sense of learning from life begins, we're going to learn from life whether we want to or not. It's, we're in a penitentiary in a certain sense, and we can't escape, uh, except ultimately we'll escape by learning the lessons that we need to learn. And Yogananda, in many of his lectures, said basically that we will just keep returning and returning again and again with the same basic lesson plan until we learn that particular lesson and then we graduate. Maybe it's about being kind to other people. And it may take us a long time to learn that lesson. But once we do, then we graduate from that particular class. Doesn't mean that we're done. We won't be ultimately done until we graduate from the greatest delusion of all, from the greatest lesson of all that we need to learn, which is the delusion is that we don't realize that we're part of God. And so until we can realize that one great final truth, we haven't ultimately learned our lessons. But it takes a long time. That's a high graduate course, postgraduate degree to learn that lesson. So in the meantime, let's talk a little bit about the Autobiography of a Yogi. How many in the room have read the Autobiography of a Yogi? Most everyone. How many in the room know the Autobiography of a Yogi? Well, if you raised your hands, go back to the book because I've read it a lot of times and I don't know it. One problem with the Autobiography of a Yogi is that every time you read it, it changes. I've probably read it, I don't know, certainly more than a dozen times. And I'll read it and I'll think, that was never in this book before. He must have added that somehow magically in this edition that I'm reading now. And it's because we learn, Master had a beautiful poem calling the day, I wake from the spiral staircase of wakefulness. And it both refers to waking up in the morning, but it refers more pertinently to the spiral stairway of wakefulness where we begin to elevate and expand our consciousness. But when you think of a spiral staircase, you keep returning. If a point is down here, you return again and again to that same point, don't you? But you return at a higher level. In fact, I have to tell you a very good line from one of our students many years ago. Devi and I were giving a course on Patanjali, and at the end of it was a week-long course, and at the end of the course, we had a chance for people to share their experiences. And one of the students in the course had a very good sense of humor. And he said, in the wrap-up session, he said, when I came here, I was really confused. He said, I'm still confused, but at a much higher level. So So the spiral staircase that we're on, we keep ascending, and as we ascend, our consciousness is more expansive, our awareness is more perceptive, and that's why when we reread the autobiography, say after a few years have gone by, we've expanded. So I think the print in the book is the same, but our ability to perceive it is different. So here's one thing that I would suggest. In fact, I want to talk about this at a little bit more depth. I would like to suggest that all of us reread the autobiography of a yogi. But Master said when he was studying with his guru, Sri Yukteswar, they were studying the Bhagavad Gita, and they studied it in a very particular way. They would read just a passage, maybe 2 or 3 verses, and then they would meditate. And then they would read that again and meditate again. Sometimes it would take a whole week on just a few of the passages, a few of the shlokas in the Bhagavad Gita. And because they were going deeper and deeper and deeper in their understanding. And so when you reread the autobiography, I would suggest that you have a little journal with you, with a pen and a paper, because instead of just reading it as a story, read it as your story. Read it as Master directly talking to you and giving you examples so that you can understand. You know, when we are trying to learn a lesson, the first thing that we need to do in learning the lesson is to pay attention. And so much of life goes by and we simply are not paying attention to it. You know, we think, oh, if only I could have some spiritual experiences, if only God would come to me. God is coming to each of us every day, all of the time. We're just not paying attention. Devi and I write a weekly blog. And in fact, those of you who would like to get it, it'll be posted on the group chat and there will be a link so that you can get that. But
And Bhakti Mark translates it into.
yeah, and Bhakti Marg translates it into Spanish. And it's also translated into Italian for the Italian speakers. And um, Davey and I have it translated back into English to improve the original writing. But in any case, writing the blog, we have to write it every week. We trade off. I write it one week, Davey writes it the next week. We have now written over 600 blogs. So since 2013, when Swami passed, we started writing, and we've never missed a week in all that time. The writing part is not the hardest part of that. Coming up with a subject after you've written 600 themes, it's not easy to come up with a subject. So what it forces us to do, which is wonderful, it forces us to pay attention to life. And so everything that happens during the week, or my mind is constantly looking at things and thinking, oh, there's a spiritual lesson in that. You know, we were just up in Avila, and now obviously we're here in Sevilla, and um, the ancient cities of Spain and of Europe have a wall around them. And inside that wall, uh, the population would retreat inside the wall for safety when they were attacked. Well, I was looking at one of the walls and I was thinking, well, that's a perfect spiritual analogy, because we retreat inside the wall of what our knowledge base is. And we're comfortable or we're safe inside that. But if we stay inside that walled universe that seems comfortable to us, we never grow. And most people are of that nature. They prefer to stay safe and not to grow than to be challenged. So our lessons never occur in the middle of our comfort zone. They always occur at the edge where we're a little bit threatened by life. We're a little bit threatened because we're at the edge of our own knowledge, our own ability to understand the world. And so what we have to do in our walled city is, if we want to grow, we have to grow that outer wall, because it has to get bigger and bigger until ultimately it has to either expand to infinity, or it has to be broken down, because, as we were talking last night, that wall is built up of our self-definitions and of our, I understand this, I don't want to be like that, I want to be, all of those self-definitions contain us and limit us. And so we have to break all of those down. So coming back to what I was saying, when we write a blog, Davy and I, because we have this kind of time pressure where we have to come up with a theme, and quite honestly, don't share this with anyone. This is just a secret between us. But quite honestly, yeah. Many times we sit without having any idea whatsoever we're going to write about. But we know that we have to finish the blog by the end of the morning, because otherwise it won't get out on time. So we sit there, and every time some theme will come. Sometimes it's a gift of God. Sometimes it, like the last bit of toothpaste in a tube, it's squeezed out. But somehow or another, it always comes, and then there is always a spiritual theme. Well, life is constantly giving us a spiritual theme. Today there will be a dozen things that occur to you, to each one of us, that has some spiritual lesson in it. And our job is to begin to pay attention to what life is bringing us. That was one of the, for me, and I think for many of us who were on the pilgrimage that we had, where we visited, first what started in Avila with Saint Teresa, and we visited many of the spots associated with her life. And then we went to Segovia and St. John of the Cross and meditated there. And then we've come here and connected with Ferdinand and Alfonso. But each one of those places, in each one of those saints, had a message for us, for each of us. Now, the message that I got was probably not the same one that you got, but each of us received a gift of insight, a gift of understanding, something from each of those great saints. But this is God's way of working. Life is, everything is waiting to give us a message that will expand our awareness and grow that outer rim of the wall. So coming back now to the Autobiography of a Yogi, it is obviously filled with wonderful stories. And when you first read it, I think the first reading, you should just read it for enjoyment, spiritual enjoyment, and to a certain extent, spiritual entertainment. In fact, Master said that, he gave hundreds of lectures within 4 or 5 years, he was the most popular speaker in all of America. He would go to a hall, and maybe the hall held 5,000 people. People would come an hour early to the hall just to get a seat, and then there would be thousands more that didn't get a seat. And it wasn't like he came to a town and only gave one talk and then left. He gave night after night after night. He'd give talks and classes, and they would always be filled. So people were waiting to get in. But he said later on to some of his closer disciples, he said, most of the people that came, they just came for spiritual entertainment. They came because it was spiritually entertaining. I mean, much better have spiritual entertainment than the other kinds of entertainment that are available. But nonetheless, the difference is they didn't apply them, didn't apply those teachings to their own life. It didn't change their lives. It just was a passing evening or passing month of them being uplifted and entertained, and then that was it. But if we leave the lessons in the autobiography to be like that, then we will have missed a great, great opportunity. So coming back to this theme of how we can live the autobiography of a yogi, I would suggest as we read over and over the autobiography of a yogi, have a journal and a pen and a paper. And when you come to a story that catches your attention, don't just read it and move on. Read it and think, what is the lesson behind the outer expression, the outer miracle, or the outer story that is here? But more importantly, how do I apply that in my life? You can take any of the stories in there. I'll just pick one at random. When Master was about 8 years old, he writes in there the story about how he was very seriously ill with Asian uh, cholera, and almost at his deathbed. And his mother was there, and she said, because his mother his parents were devotees, disciples of Lahiri Mahashaya. And so his mother said, bow, I know you're too weak to move, but mentally bow to Lahiri Mahashaya and he will heal you. And Master did that. And a great light came out of that photo and he was healed. And then his mother confirmed that it wasn't his imagination. She bowed and said, thank you for the light that has healed my son. Well, that's just one story of a miracle. And you can read that story and, oh, isn't that nice? Master had that nice experience. Then you move on to the next story and you don't pay attention very deeply. And you go through the book like that. And yes, you'll get spiritual entertainment from it, but you won't get the real lessons that are available there. So when you come to a story that interests you, just stop and then meditate the way Master meditated with Sri Yukteswar with the Gita. Meditate not just on what the meaning of that story is, but how does that story apply to my life in my present circumstances? And, each of us has to do that on our own, but just coming to that story, one of the obvious lessons is that a photo is just a photo, it's just ink on paper, unless we see that photo as being a holder of the divine consciousness. And so if we see that photo and worship it and ask God's presence to come through us from that photo, God's presence will come. Some light will come. Maybe we don't have cholera. Maybe we're not on our deathbed, but we're definitely ill. We all have the chronic disease of ignorance, and we're trying to overcome that. So one of the aspects of that story is that where we see sanctity, where we see God's presence, if we consciously recognize that God is here, then God will speak to us. God will help us. God will send his light to us. But we have to bow down. Here, Master bowed down mentally, but worshipfully and openly so that he could receive. So that's just one of many lessons in there. But as I'm suggesting how we live the autobiography, take one of those stories and read it and then ask, now what is really going on here? What's the deeper level? What's the story meaning to import to us? What lesson? And then ask not just what is the general lesson here, but what is my lesson in this? Because all of these are photos of the master. If we worship those in such a way that we really saw God's presence in those photos, they would speak to us. And the more we do that, it's not a one-time thing. The more we do that, the more those seemingly inanimate objects will speak to us. Davy and I, oh, that's not that one. Oh, I love that photo of Master anyway. Oh, don't want to, we have that. I'm going to just take a little side step here. Our son is not actively on the spiritual path, meaning he's a very, very spiritual person, but he doesn't have the devotional aspect. I think he was a Tibetan yogi in a past life, so it's more impersonal. But we have two grandchildren, and he would come out with the two grandchildren, and we would entertain them, and then he would go in our bedroom, and we always thought he was taking a nap. And he'd go in the bedroom and close the door, and about a half hour later he'd come back out. We thought, oh, he had a nice rest. He took a little nap in there. He had the grandparents to take care of the kids and so on. But wasn't that at all. One time he was saying, when you two pass, I don't want any material things. I don't want any of the possessions. But the one thing that I do want is I want that photo on your bedroom wall of Master. This one. Yeah, this one. But that isn't the one on our bedroom wall unless it has transported itself here, which is entirely possible. But he said, I want that photo because we said, well, of course you can have it, but why? He said, well, when I go into the bedroom, I talk with Master. I ask him questions and he talks with me and he tells me, gives me advice on how to do things and how to live my life. And it's a beautiful relationship. So there are many lessons just in that. One, you can't judge people on the surface of their behavior, because there may be a whole lot more going on that they're not wanting. They maybe don't feel safe to open up to you. And so accept the fact that everybody has God within them, and that God within them is yearning to reunite with the great expansive God. But coming back to this theme of our lesson from Autobiography of a Yogi, when we see something that indicates a spiritual presence, if we understand that God is there in that presence, he will be there. Master said, when I'm gone, if you think me near, I will be near. If you think him in a photo, he will talk to you. He will communicate with you. And if you think God present in anybody that you're talking with or working with, God will be there. But we have to bring our awareness. So that is one of the lessons for me of this story of the light from Lahiri Mahashaya healing the young master. But there are many layers and layers of lessons in that. Ramakrishna used a beautiful image about spiritual advancement or evolution. He said, we're like onions, and you take an onion and you peel off a layer, say peel off a layer of delusion around us, and there's another layer underneath that. And then you peel off that next layer of delusion, and you keep that process up until you've peeled away and there's nothing left of the onion. It's gone. And so it is with our delusion that if we pay attention, God is constantly trying to speak to us. God is always sending a message, just like the sun is constantly shining. It never stops. It never stops giving us light, never stops giving us energy. But we may, with our minds and our moods and our not paying attention, we may create a cloud layer above us that blocks the light of the sun from getting through to a very large degree. And so our job is not to make the sun shine. The sun's doing its job. Our job is to get rid of the cloud layer. One time, somebody said to Master, "Oh, Master, I'm trying to do this. I need your blessing." And Master said, "God's blessings are there already. My blessings are there. It's your blessings that are lacking." And all of life is like that. God's blessing is already there in everything that comes to us. Master said that everything that comes as an act of love from God, from Divine Mother. That's hard to recognize in our life. Why? Because we have attachments to wanting it this way and not wanting it that way. And so God's lesson plan is in part to break those attachments. But the first step in being a good student is to accept the fact that you need to learn your lesson. But if you say, "Oh, I don't want to learn this lesson," push it away, God is coming to us. Maybe he's coming through illness. Maybe he's coming through losing money. Maybe he's coming through any of a myriad of ways that we say, "Oh, I don't want that lesson. I don't want that. Oh, don't do that to me. Oh, please, God, don't." God is trying to cure something in us through absolutely everything that comes. And so one of the first steps of being a good student is saying, "Okay, I accept this as my lesson plan." Because God, in cooperation with your own soul and your own karma, has perfectly devised the curriculum for you for the lessons in this life. And so whatever comes, at least accept them. Maybe we can't be grateful for being ill. That's another step above it, but we can at least accept that this is mine to learn. This is coming from God for my benefit somehow. And if we do that, then we open ourselves to the understanding of God's teaching for us. So coming back to how do we live the autobiography of a yogi, I would suggest that you take a slow ride through the autobiography of a yogi. There's an old song, "A Slow Boat to China," that takes a long time and a very relaxed pace to get there. Take a slow boat with the autobiography of a yogi. And every time you come to something that catches your attention, think, "Okay, this has caught my attention because God is trying to educate me through this and meditate on it, think about it, but most importantly, think about how it applies to you in your life. And then as you do that, you will find that, uh, like the onion that's being peeled, another layer will be revealed to you, and you'll get a thought, I need to change my behavior. I need to change something that I'm doing, some perception. And then you'll have the opportunity to will speak to you in this way through the autobiography. And if you understand it and listen sensitively, you will have the opportunity to say yes to some change in yourself that needs to happen. And if you can say yes to that change and really try to make that change, then the walls of your fortified city are going to expand in that manner. And so the autobiography is filled with hundreds, if not thousands, of individual lessons for each and every one of us. But we can't get them just by skimming through the book and saying, "Oh, that wasn't Master lucky? He got a saint to show him the light after he had to go this crochet and that crochet and that crochet." Yes, he made a little mistake, but then it was really to lead him to the saint, and the saint showed him the light. Oh, wasn't he fortunate? There's a whole lesson plan in there. What that's, I think you all know that, who've read the autobiography, know his story. He started out, he wanted to go visit this saint, and he went to a temple, Tarakshatra, Tarakeshwar, and there's a stone image there, Shiva Lingam, and Master refused to worship it. He said, "No, God is everywhere. Why should I pay particular attention to this stone image?" And so he didn't worship it. And then he went and he asked directions to the saint's house, and somebody sent him the wrong direction. And the day, hour after hour passed, and people would say, "Oh, it's just one more crochet, one more half kilometer in that direction." But he spent all day wandering. And finally, the saint said, "You know what? The reason that you asked directions from people who didn't bother about left and right or east and west is because you didn't bother about recognizing the fact that God was in that stone image. You wouldn't worship it." And Master had, let's call it, at that time, Master's demonstrating for us, he had a good consciousness, but it was a little bit of a walled city. God is everywhere. Why should I worship him in one particular place? Well, the lesson is that God manifests more particularly in some things than in other things. God is in these walls, but you look at this wall, you're much less likely to recognize that God is there than if you look at a picture of Master. And you recognize, oh, that's God. But is the wall God? Of course the wall is God. But it's harder to recognize because God manifests more consciously in certain things. So I'm just, frankly, I'm rambling a little bit here. But trying to convey the fact that every story in the autobiography of a yogi will have a particular lesson and a lesson plan for you. And if we do that, and with the journal, Master said, if you want to understand something, you should read it, but you should also write down your thoughts as you read that. And he very clearly suggested that we read scripture in that way and ask how it applies to us. So as you go through the autobiography of a yogi, and find story after story after story in there, then you'll begin to understand more deeply. Many of you know, but Ananda is working on probably a 24 episode streaming series of the Autobiography of a Yogi. And we're working on the script, and we'll film it in India. We've got a director, and really at a very, very high level production. Will be wonderful. But the man writing the script he's a wonderful man. He's one of the main teachers of Ananda Center in Seattle. His name is Murali Venkatrao. But he has one of those minds that goes deeper and deeper and deeper. So he and some others working on the film decided that one of the things they would do last fall was they would take a kind of a pilgrimage with a group of about 5 of them, and they would go to the various cities and areas that Master writes about in the Autobiography of a Yogi. But they were in Calcutta, and Murali said, now what I've done is I've looked not just at Calcutta as it is now, because in the movie, it's not going to be present day Calcutta. It's going to be Calcutta of the time that Master lived there. And here's what Calcutta looked like in those days. Here's a map of it. And when we go from where Master lived to where a saint that he might have been visiting, let's go the way that Master would have gone. And they go the back alleys and the streets that were of those days, but aren't there in the present time. And it's just an illustration of the kind of attention that looks deeper and deeper in the stories and in the events and in the life. So kind of to summarize, first of all, let's understand, all of us, each of us, that everything that happens to us happens for a spiritual purpose. Let's not reject it. Secondly, it happens to us for our education and entertainment. But as Master said, we're often not either educated or entertained. But at least let's be educated. Let's pay attention to what comes to us. And with the autobiography, let's pay attention in a very individualized and particular way to the stories in there, and go deeper and deeper and deeper into them until we understand not only how does this story, how does this event, how does this relationship, how does this conflict, how does that apply to my life? And what should I do about it? How should I change my life, my behavior, my relationships in order to ultimately arrive at what Master arrived at, which is the understanding that God is present, that life is beautiful, that once we've learned our lessons and expanded those walls of our city of delusion, then we can roam freely through the entire universe. But all of us have a wonderful opportunity in this life, partly because we have been drawn to such high teachings and the grace of such high teachers, but also because we have each other. We have a Sangha, and that's growing in Spain. It's well established in America and India and many European countries, and growing stronger and stronger year by year here in Spain. And so we have a great line of self-realized teachers. We have the highest teachings that are available, and we have the support and love and grace of having a spiritual family that we can talk about these things. I mean, here we are, a beautiful little spiritual family, sitting here talking about wonderful lessons from the Autobiography of a Yogi. What a wonderful way to spend a Saturday morning, huh? But how many others are doing anything close to this? It's a wonderful opportunity that we have in this life. Let's make use of it. God bless. Oh, thank you.
Thank you, Jyotish. That was very inspiring. This is Ramon. He has made all the translations possible on this journey. So I would like to now take the next step for all of us and take us through a journey, on a journey through Autobiography of a Yogi, and what are the lessons we can learn on this journey. So let's start when Master, very first page of Autobiography of a Yogi, when he's first born. And he says his earliest memories were those of a hermit in the Himalayas. Uh, and then he wondered, what was he doing here with all these people around him in a pleasant home? And he said, perhaps those memories were also a prophecy of the future, because Master said in his next lifetime, he would incarnate as a hermit in the Himalayas, away from all the hustle and bustle of the world. But he remembered that past life. And I want all of us, I've done this often, to try to remember, maybe not specific past lives, but memories of, you wouldn't be here if you hadn't had previous lives on the spiritual path, seeking God. Try to recall those. What was that life? When Swami asked Jyotish and me and a few others to help establish Ananda in Italy, this was in early 1980s. We came to Italy, but all the doors seemed symbolically closed. We didn't speak the language, and we didn't know anybody, very little money, and we just felt like strangers in a strange land. But then the thought came, we were up in northern Italy, a friend had a house there she was letting us use. And we thought, let's go to Assisi. As soon as we arrived in the city of Assisi, we knew where everything was. We knew how to get around. We could communicate with people. And it was like, we've been here before. And so try to remember your first memory of your first connection with Master in this lifetime. For me, I was quite a little girl, and I was looking, I couldn't read yet, so I don't know, 3, 4 years old. And I was looking at a magazine, just looking at the pictures that my father had. And there must have been an advertisement for Autobiography of a Yogi, because I remembered looking at that picture and pondering, is that a man? Is that a woman? And just looking at it. But then you forget. You go on and life becomes very interesting and engaging, and you forget. But try to remember, just as Master remembered that past life of seeking God. And so this world, this life that he was born, that life that he was born into, this life that we have been born into, it's a play that we're have a role in, but it is not our true self. It is not our true home. And try to remember and pick up again those steps of of connecting with your past spiritual lives, just as Master did. Another aspect of his life as a child was, here he was, this avatar, a fully realized master. And he was born in a household with 6 brothers and sisters, commotion and noise and rivalry and all of these things. But it was important for a very devotional, devout mother and father. But it was important for all of us, for Master not to be a hermit in the Himalayas, because he came to bring these teachings to men and women living ordinary lives like all of us do. And so look at the life around you, look at the people in your life and say, just as Master honored his mother, father, obeyed his brother, realize that we have a part to play in this life. It may not be our ultimate goal, but we have a job of responsibility. We may have family or children or whatever it may be, but just as Master fulfilled his obligations in his family, not as a Babaji in the Himalayas, but just living among people. And he came to show us how to spiritualize our daily life. You don't have to run away from your life, but you don't have to identify with it either. You just play your part, play it well as Master did. Now, a third lesson we can learn from Master's childhood: 1, to remember higher past lives; 2, to look at the life you live in now and don't push it away. Embrace it. Do the best you can for mother, father, children, friends, whatever it may be. But don't identify with it either. And then third, and this is an interesting story, you'll remember it from the autobiography. He was with his sister Uma, older sister Uma, out on a porch, and she was helping him with his studies. And she went and got some salve, healing salve, ointment, and she put it on her leg. And she said, "Oh, I'm getting a boil there." And Master said, "Oh, well, let me have some." Little Mukunda, we should call him, his boyhood name. And he put some on his right forearm. And she said, "Why are you doing that?" And he said, "Oh, tomorrow I'm going to have a big boil there." And she said, "Oh, you don't know that." And he said, "You wait and see. Tomorrow your boil will be twice as big on your leg, and I'm going to have a big boil on my arm." And so it came to pass. And his sister Uma was terrified. She was ran to their mother and said, "Mukunda has become a magician, a necromancer." And his mother was very stern. And she said, "Never use the power of your words to hurt another person." And that's the lesson for all of us. In our words, in our actions, it's very easy to react, to push back as Master did. You know, you're going to have it worse yourself if you doubt me. But just to never use our thoughts, our words, or actions to hurt others, ever. And if we can start that in our own life, and that wave of kindness and compassion that Master epitomized, that can make a change in human consciousness. And Master said he still had a scar when he wrote Autobiography, to remember that. And interestingly, this is a little sidelight, I've shared it with some of you, but we have a friend who lives in Boston, Massachusetts, Dmitri, some of you knew him, who was a Russian immigrant. He came a number of years ago as an immigrant on a boat, knowing no one, with very little money, arrived in Boston, just as Master had did. He's a Kriya disciple. And he said, "My guru came just as I came, just as my guru came, a stranger to this land. And so I wanted to look up the naval records of who was on that ship that landed in Boston Harbor in 1920. And he found the records, it's called the ship's manifest, of the city of Sparta, very name fraught with meaning. Sparta was the warriors and Master came as a warrior. And in the list of the passengers, there were people from all over the world, but there was one Mukunda Lal Ghosh from, he said Ranchi, that's where his school was, where he was living, from Ranchi, India. Any distinguishing marks? Scar on the right forearm. That's what it listed on the ship's manifest. And any money, he had $500 check from his father. You know, it was so sweet to see that, just among all the other people that arrived in Boston Harbor on that day in September in 1920. But just the lesson we learned from that story in the autobiography, the power of our words to hurt or to heal. You know, we had a friend who had a terminal disease. This is a true story. And it was a long-term process. And then she got very sick at a certain point with, and she had a friend who had the same terminal disease who lived elsewhere. She lived at Ananda Village. And these two friends who were both suffering from this disease said, as long as one of us is alive, the other one will keep alive. They made that pact. And so our friend, her name was Happy, on top of the terminal disease, came down with a very bad case of the flu. And she was in the hospital and we thought she was dying. And Swami, and then word came, she hadn't received it yet, that her friend had died, who she'd made the pact with to stay alive. And Swami said to a few of us, to me and another woman, you have to go tell Happy that her friend has died. I said, oh dear, okay. So we went into the hospital and Swami was with us, but he waited in the hall. And we just couldn't find the words to say it to her because she was just recovering. And so we came out and Swami said, did you tell her? And we said, no, Swami, we couldn't. He said, all right, I'll do it. He went in, the power of human words to hurt or to heal. He looked at her with the most power I have ever heard in a human voice. And he said, Happy, your friend died and you haven't. Now you must get well. And she did. She did. And she died 5 years later of the disease, but in that moment, his words healed her. And so remember that, the power of your own words. Maybe you won't cause someone to get a boil or heal from a terminal illness, but words hurt. And Master was saying that right at the beginning. Use your words for goodness, never to hurt others. So those are 3 lessons from his childhood. And then we move on. And in the earlier, the sort of childhood and later childhood, what did Master do? He visited saints everywhere, everywhere. He was always looking, going to visit this saint and that saint. And luckily his father was an executive in the railroad, so he always got tickets to go wherever he wanted. But always looking for that wisdom everywhere. And it wasn't just in his adolescence. Of course, he continued throughout his life. Even when he came to America, which doesn't have, I'm sorry to say, a tradition of saints, but he found Luther Burbank, the great botanist and horticulturalist, and he dedicated Autobiography to Luther Burbank, an American saint. And then on his way back to India. And why was he doing all this? Because he wanted to show that saints are not just based in India. So American saint. Then in his way back to Europe, stopping in Europe on his way back to India, he visited Teresa Neumann in Bavaria, who was a stigmatist, had the signs of the cross. And he was trying to show us, look for holiness in people everywhere. And that's why we have Sangha. That's why we have gathering of truth, satsanga, gathering of truth seekers. Maybe we're not saints, but we're on the path and we love our guru and we've given our life to our guru. And so our lesson is to be with people who uplift our consciousness. If you have friends that are always putting your spiritual life down or being skeptical or cynical or whatever, sarcastic, maybe that's not a friendship worth having. But if you have friends that just support you in your spiritual life, encourage you, those are the people, those are your saints that you need to spend time with, and not just accept that the worldly pull is the only human relationships you can have. So visit saints, and just as, and you know, saints don't leave their blessing when they leave. I mean, they don't, their blessings don't stop when they leave their body. We just were, as you all know, many of you were with us in Avila. The presence of Saint Teresa is so strong, so blessed. We just felt such a gift from being in her presence. And then up to Sevilla, St. John of the Cross, the vibrations of these saints still exist. And Jyotish was talking about a photo has power if we give it power. Well, it's the same with these holy places. If people visit them with devotion, it it brings that energy out that the saints have left. But if they are forgotten, if they are obscured, those vibrations withdraw. They don't go, they don't end, but they withdraw. So by us making pilgrimages to holy places, it recharges the spiritual vibration in those places, and then more people can draw from them. So it's not just for ourselves that we make pilgrimages and visit holy places, but it's to recharge the spiritual power centers on the earth today. Very important. So going back to autobiography then, so Master would visit the saints, and then finally I meet my guru, Sri Yukteswar. He meets his guru, and the training begins. And it's very, very interesting, the relationship between Sri Yukteswar and Master, because Sri Yukteswar, or Master said, growing up, my father was strict. My elder brother, Ananta, was harsh, but Sri Yukteswar was severe. But we need to understand it's a relationship of love, eternal love, but it is also a relationship of discipline. And they will bring you, the guru will bring you the lessons you need. And if we run away from them and say, oh, this is too hard, I can't do this, then they withdraw. But if we say, bring it on, that's why Masters interpreted the passage from the Bible. If someone slaps you, turn the other cheek. And it's usually interpreted to be humble and meek and don't fight back. Master said, no. The deeper explanation, if your karma hits you on one side, turn and say, bring it on. I face it, I want it. And so to accept the discipline of the guru, just as Master did. And Sri Yukteswar was training him for a mission, a world mission amongst people who had no understanding of yoga, meditation, inner life, the energy in the spine, any of that. And he had to be strong to be able to face that. Well, my friends, we also have to be strong. One, if we want to find God, but two, because we are Master's children. And in another sense, we are Master's army. And we need to help fight the battles that come to us, but then remain strong in ourselves and don't fear the test. You know, what one of Master's great lines was, I shouldn't say great lines, it's one of his expressions of wisdom was, it was at a wedding and he was giving roses to some of his women disciples. And he gave one to a woman, a pink rose, and she said, oh, I didn't want a pink rose, I wanted a red rose. And you think, that's not such a big deal. But Master got very stern and he said, what God gives, you take. And we have found this in our own life. Whenever the tests come, if you just say, oh, poor me, this is so hard, or if you say, what am I supposed to learn from this experience? Then the lessons come and the blessings come. And Master says in Autobiography, when I stopped resisting the stern discipline of Sri Yukteswar and accepted whatever you bring me, I take. He said, then he became more lenient. It's very interesting. And so it's a play within ourselves when we can just say, I am not afraid of whatever karma comes my way. I accept it, knowing it's from God and Guru for my education and entertainment, but more for me to dissolve my karma. That's what this life is all about, whether through Kriya Yoga, meditation, service, satsang, all of that. It's to dissolve our karma so that we can stand free. And it's hard to see it in yourself. It's hard to see the changes that the Guru brings, that service brings, that meditation brings, Kriya Yoga brings. But these masters, we have to trust. They came for a purpose, and that purpose is to bring us to God. And step by step, we are working out our karma, and there's nothing that happens by chance. Not one little thing. Christ said, not a hair on your head is not counted. God knows everything. He knows exactly what you need to learn. And so the guru-disciple relationship is one of the main lessons on our journey through Autobiography of a Yogi. How to accept that kind of discipline, how to rejoice when the tests come, and how to realize, how to see, never lose sight of your goal. The goal is self-realization. And whatever happens that brings you to that is just a gift from God. So the guru-disciple relationship. And then Sri Yukteswar trained master, as we know, for this mission to the West. And here's another lesson that we can apply in our own life. It was master's dharma to fulfill this divine plan in each of our lives. The lesson then is to look at our own dharma. What has God given us to do in this life? Master was given the role of coming to the West. But if he hadn't been given that role, if God gave him the role to go and be a hermit in the Himalayas, that's what he would have done. But for each of us, we have a dharma to fulfill. And we have to try to, what am I supposed to do in this life? What am I supposed to accomplish? And then look clearly and accomplish that goal. It says in the Bhagavad Gita, very interesting, better to fail at your own dharma than to succeed in someone else's dharma. So better to find out what your path in life, where is it taking you, and acknowledge it. Don't, as Jyotish made a very important point, conscious awareness of life. That's Master's greatest gift to us. Conscious awareness of what your dharma is. Even if you're elderly, then you're conscious and you can't act anymore, you can't serve anymore. You can still go deeper into God, and that's your dharma. And your dharma will change over time. Sometimes it's to raise a child. Sometimes it's to be a doctor and serve people in the hospital. Sometimes it's to design new engineering projects. But look at Master is telling us, each one of us has an important role. It's important in the sense that we're fulfilling a dharmic responsibility, and then to live that and to do it to the best of our ability. If we fail, it's really not all that important, honestly. It's better to fail at your own dharma than to succeed at someone else's, meaning, you know, maybe in a past life, you were a brilliant scientist and you really had to concentrate and you did wonderfully and made great discoveries. But then you did that already. And then in this life, Master comes or God comes and says, now you need to give more love to people. That maybe is hard for you. And it was much easier to be a scientist. And you try to go back to that, but you won't learn those lessons. Now you have to see, what are the lessons in this life that I need to learn, and work with them and do the best you can. But then, the wonderful phrase in the Bhagavad Gita, Nishkam karma, non-attachment to the fruits of your efforts. So if you succeed, great. If you don't succeed, you give it to God. You give it to God in any case. And Swami often said, Swami Kriyananda, he did so much in his life, writing books and music and lecturing in communities. We talked about it last night. But he always said, I didn't do anything. God did it all. And so he accomplished more in one lifetime than it's hard to imagine, but he did. But he never had any personal identification with that. And that's a path to freedom. And just to do what you need to do, but don't think I am doing it. It is being done. It is being done through me. And then 2 more lessons on our journey through the autobiography of a yogi. One is the underlying joy that is in that book. An avatar, an incarnation of God. But at the same time, you read an interrupted flight to the Himalayas, where he's teasing, he and his friends are teasing each other and laughing, and now we will change into the clothes of young British boys, and getting on the train. And there's this mirth, joy, bubbling up from so many of the stories in autobiography. And just to say, whatever happens, try to find that joy. We've told you this, many of you, this story, but it was like such a beautiful encapsulation. In Ananda village, 1976, we had a big forest fire. Everything was burnt to the ground, no insurance, nothing left. A friend, one of our friends who lost everything, she called her mother, and her mother said, well, did you get the furniture out? And she said, no, mother, we couldn't get anything out. Big forest fire. Did you get your clothes out? No, mother, we couldn't get our clothes out. Well, what did you get out? And she said, mother, visualize a handful of ashes. That's what we have now. But so this happened, and Jyotish, we had a home that burned to the ground, and we had a child that had been born 10 days before this happened. So we had a newborn little baby and no home, no possessions. And but at that point, that moment in time, I didn't know if I was at a different part of the property. I didn't know if Jyotish was still alive or not. And I was just standing there wondering, what next, God? And then I saw Jyotish coming down the hill from where our house was. And so I knew he was alive. And the house we lived in leaked he built it. And it wasn't his fault. He gets mad when I tell this story, but it's true. That he built the house, and it was a geodesic dome. They're hard to build, and it leaked very badly. So here we've lost everything. He's coming down the hill. There's a new little baby. And I thought, I don't want him to be worried about me. And I think he was thinking the same thing. So I put a big smile on my face, and he put a big smile on his face. And the first thing he said when we saw each other, you know what? We don't have to worry about leaks anymore, because the house had burned to the ground. So no more leaks. But I thought, wow, if you can find joy in that moment, no matter when you've lost every single thing you have, then this path, our grace of our guru, it's real. It's worth every moment you put into it. So that underlying joy, that try to find that, and no matter what comes, there's still, Swami had a beautiful saying. He said, joy is the solution, not the reward. So don't just wait for joy to come. Oh, if I'm really good and I accomplish this, I'll be happy. Joy is the solution. You choose joy no matter what happens. And this is the underlying vibration of Autobiography of a Yogi, that underlying joy that is possible under all circumstances. And then one of the last points I'll make is, the last point that I'll make is the foundation, if you read it, underlying foundation of joy, but underlying foundation of divine love, unconditional. And I want to just read you the last page of Autobiography. If technology obeys, and it did. Okay, so this is, oh, I have it. Oh, it's in the appendix, and it's I don't know, it doesn't say a page on my iPhone, but if you bring it to me, I'll show you. Pardon?
The last line.
It's the last page. Go to the very last end of the book. She's gonna read it. Okay, so it's here. God is love. Do you see it? I don't think you have the right page, Bhakti-Mar. Oh, okay, all right. Okay. Okay. I'm gonna read it and then you can find it later. So this is the very end of Autobiography. God is love. His plan for creation can be rooted only in love. Does not that simple thought, more than any erudite cosmological tome, offer solace to the human heart? Every saint who has penetrated to the core of reality has testified that a divine universal plan exists and that it is beautiful and full of joy. To the prophet Isaiah, God revealed his intentions in these words. This is from the Old Testament. So shall my word, creative Om, be that goeth forth out of my mouth. It shall not return unto me void, but it shall accomplish what I please, and it shall prosper in the thing for which I have sent it. For ye shall go out with joy and be led forth with peace. The mountains and the hills shall break forth before you singing, and all the trees of the field shall clap their hands. End quote. Master goes on. Ye shall go out with joy and be led forth with peace. The people of a hard-pressed 20th century hear longingly that wondrous promise. Yet the full truth within it is realizable by every devotee of God who strives manfully to repossess his divine heritage. The blessed role of Kriya Yoga in East and West has hardly more than just begun. May all men come to know that there exists a definite scientific technique of self-realization for the overcoming of all human misery. In sending loving vibrations to the thousands of Kriya Yogis scattered like shining jewels over the earth, I often think gratefully, Lord, thou hast given this monk a large family. And that's how he closes his autobiography. And his family of Kriya Yogis does not belong to one nation, to one people, belongs to the world. And he came for a great awakening of human consciousness. But we have to realize that the autobiography is not a book, even though it's printed or on digital or audio. The autobiography of a yogi is a living reality. And often in my life, when I've been at a crossroads, not knowing what decision to make, I have a practice that I'll open the autobiography and just randomly point my finger to a passage, and I'll do it 3 times. And always within those 3 those 3 efforts to find guidance, I find the answer. It's really quite astonishing. And that's something I can recommend to you too. When you're trying to find guidance, just open autobiography at random and put your finger on a page and read what it master says to you. But the more, just as the portrait of Lahiri Mahashaya became a living reality, the autobiography is a living reality. It can be, if that was all Master gave us, and we know it wasn't, but if that was all he gave us, it would be sufficient. It could be a guide to our finding God. And so let's realize that we are part of Master's family. The shining jewels he saw scattered all over the world. We are those shining jewels, and he sees us now, and he's saying, go forth with joy and know that the turmoil of the world in which we live now, it's just a passing dream. The realities are God's plan, rooted in joy, rooted in love. And the autobiography is the gift to this age, the living reality of how we as individuals can find God, and how we together can help change the consciousness of this planet to a more uplifted one that can bring peace and joy and divine harmony. So, my brothers and sisters, my friends, we are very happy to be with you this morning and to share this living reality that Master has given to us all. God bless you.